Welcome back to the Everyday Art series. In this class, we are going to be painting a really pretty, soft pink poinsettia. I'm planning on doing sort of a soft sage green background, and I'm so excited to get started on this with you. So get comfortable. Let's have some fun and paint. I have everything set up here to get started. Here are our limited colors that we use in all of our Everyday Art Series classes. There will be a link in this video to all of these colors, so feel free to use those links to grab these colors if you like. This is a little cup of the airbrush medium. This is what I use in place of water to thin my paint a little bit, help it move a little bit more. I have set out a couple of colors. I have some titanium white, a tiny dot of phthalo blue because it's so strong, a little bit larger dot of the Hansa yellow opaque, and then a tiny bit of the burnt sienna. Just set out a tiny bit of color, just a couple of drops or so. If we need to mix more, we can certainly do that, but we don't want to waste our paints. We want to mix up a small amount at a time just so it doesn't dry on our palette. I do have a palette knife out for mixing some of the greens. I'm going to be mixing some pinks later too. The nice thing about a palette knife is it, it doesn't load up a lot of the paint within a brush. I love to brush mix and I do that quite a bit, but when I'm mixing a base color, it is sometimes nice to have a palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, you could use something simple like a tongue depressor, really anything that you have to mix. And of course, you can mix with a brush too. So those are all just options. Let's go ahead and start mixing up a green. I'm going to just pick a little bit of this phthalo blue up and start to mix it into the yellow. You can see just how strong that blue really is. Just takes the tiniest little bit. I'm going to add in just a touch of the burnt sienna just to tone it down a little bit. When I say tone, I mean I just want to soften it. I don't want it to be, too bright. And the burnt sienna is a nice option for just toning it a little bit, softening it a little. And then we'll bring over a little bit of the titanium white. And I don't have to mix this completely. I can leave little areas where some of the darker green is, some of the lighter green is. It's one of the easy mistakes to make is just over mixing. And all of those color variations really help us. I'm going to go ahead and wet my brush in the airbrush medium and then blot it out, get most of it out. And let's start painting. I want to start pretty light. So I already got a drip of airbrush medium on my piece here. So it'll probably take us a couple of coats to get the look that we're really going for here. The first layers are always just a little rougher. When we get the first layer down, the next layers go on much easier. But I am just going to crisscross my brush, use somewhat light pressure. I'm not worried about going over these lines of the poinsettia. It's fine. In fact, it's easier when we come in later to add some of the poinsettia leaves in if if we've overpainted that area a little bit. Just keeps us from having to come back in and fill in later. I think I'm going to tone it just a little more, add just a little bit more of the burnt sienna. I want this to feel very airy back here. Varied the color. I just dipped into a little bit more of the titanium white. Remember the engraved art panels, like the one that I'm painting here, are all available at Shelly Parker Art. They're really so convenient. You really are ready to just start painting when you get yours in. Um, all you have to do is seal it like we talked about, and you are ready to paint. No tracers to add or anything like that. So I hope you can see very quickly with just a tiny bit of paint, we already have a really pretty base started. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward from here and paint around the outside edges just to get those covered. And then we'll come back in and do a little bit more refining on the base. Okay, we have just a really simple base painted in here. It's a little bit loose. It really is fine just as it is. You really wouldn't have to do much more. I'm gonna I'm gonna add to it just a little bit. Um, Sometimes as paints dry, especially on a wood substrate, um, some of that wood can start to somewhat show through. So having enough paint down on the piece really does look better in the end. Um, Once you get the first base down and yours looks about like mine, it is nice to just give it a moment, let it dry a little bit, and that will make coming back in and adding another layer so much easier. If you're struggling at all, when you come back in on this next part, if your paint is lifting at all, just take a little break, walk away from it, and let it dry up a little bit better. I'm going to mix just a little bit more green. Maybe I'll just bring a little bit of the phthalo over to the Hansa Yellow Opaque. And then back to a little bit of the burnt sienna like we did before. I think I want just a little bit more yellow. I didn't shake my paints very well before starting. It's probably a good idea to give them a little shake just to redistribute the pigment so it's not, so that pigment isn't settled too much at the bottom. Tiny bit more of the phthalo. All right. Check. I touch the outside of mine just to see how dry it is. I did paint all around the edges, and really all I was looking for in painting around the edges was just making sure that I had just a little bit of that color variation going on over there too. Probably should set out a little bit more of the titanium white as well. I'm just going to come in and just start to X in a little bit more color. You don't want it to be too dark. Let's put out a little bit more of the titanium white. Lucy is stalking me. I can feel that she's gonna come in here. So you can kind of see some different tones happening there. It's a little bit yellower in some places. I really love how that looks. And because we already have that initial base down, we can really be very loose. Just light pressure on the brush, just X over. I just set out just a little bit more titanium white. Generally, as you're setting up your palette, it will take more titanium white and more of the yellows than any other color. So even though I talked about, being careful not to put out too much paint, it will take a little bit more of those colors. So I'm just being loose. If you get too much paint in your brush, go ahead and wipe it out on a paper towel or wipe it on your rag like I like to have on my desk. And just be loose. I really love the backgrounds. I love that I can just be very loose, let some different colors of paint come out of my brush at different spots, come back in with some titanium white to add more motion and different little things happening here. I'm always surprised whenever I come back and look at my paintings when they're finished, how much some of these little wispy strokes that you make really can add so much to the final piece. Just stepped back into a little bit of that darker green again. I do sometimes like to sort of vignette my pieces, letting the corners be just a little bit darker. You can do whatever you like. I think that looks pretty good. I like that. Um, right now it looks a little bit busy. I um, I don't mind that. It's going to look busy because we don't have any of the poinsettia painted in yet. So don't judge this background too quickly. I think I'm going to call that pretty well done for the background. Um, on the camera, it looks a little bit rough, but remember when we bring in the poinsettia over the top of it, it's going to settle everything down more. Don't judge the background too quickly. Let it be as it is. We can always come back in and make more adjustments later if we need to. But while I have this mixed, these greens mixed, I am going to come in and go over the edges a little bit again, just to be sure, like I mentioned earlier, that the wood is really covered and that there's enough paint there to make it look like it's finished, not make it look like the wood is peeking through too much. So I'll fast forward again here for just a moment while I finish taking this color around again. And I will mention while we're here that I will be loading to this class the my color mix worksheet. So let me pull it over and show it to you. The color mix worksheet that you can download with this class will have my mixes filled in for you, but there will also be openings in the boxes for you to be able to add your color mixes. And I really do suggest that you um, take the time to put your color mixes there. Every color mix will be a little bit different. What you mix will be just slightly different from mine. Mine is just a little hint of where to start. But these color mix worksheets are really valuable later on for you to be able to refer back to. If you're a selling artist, it's nice to refer back to them to see what colors you used. Of course, with our limited palette, we always sort of know what colors we have. And mix up just a little bit more green, but look how look how much phthalo blue is in there. Even though I tapped some out, it still was a lot of phthalo blue. And remember, our phthalo blue is so much stronger than our cadmium yellow. I'm sorry, our Hansa yellow opaque. So even just what was left in my brush was plenty. I'm actually going to just wipe out my brush just to control that a little bit and come back in and soften some of that a little bit. Okay, I'm going to fast forward from here and then we will meet back up for the next part. Okay, I think we have a really good foundation now for our painting. I've gone around all of the edges like you could see in that fast forward and just tried to let some of those brush strokes show. Like I said, when you've done a few pieces and you look back at how interesting some of these backgrounds can be, um, they almost kind of end up being my favorite even more than the painting itself. I'm going to come back in and touch in just a few spots of pure yellow. This is just the Hansa yellow opaque. So I'm just going to touch that in and then wipe out my brush a little bit, dip back into the titanium white and just soften the edges of those pops of color just a little bit. I think that the little areas of that warmer yellow will really help. Got a hair in my brush that I'm fighting a little bit. So with a mostly clean brush, just a little bit of the titanium white, I can come back in, soften those a little bit. Again, just lightly sort of letting the brush dance across the background a little bit. But that warm color really can add a lot. Really just be interesting to look at. So I think that we're going to end this video here. I'm going to be coming back in on the next video and painting in the basing in basically the leaves and start to build those colors. And I think that you'll be excited to see how it starts to come together. So I'll see you in the next class. Welcome back to the studio. In the last video, we got the background all placed and it's really looking pretty. We're ready now to start basing in some of the leaf shapes. For the leaves, I'm going to be making a green that leans just a little bit cooler, so a little bit more blue. And I'm going to be already in this first layer beginning to build in some of the variations and the color shifts that we're going to have in the end. So let's get started painting. Here is our messy palette that we have from painting in the background. And I'm just going to keep using this. If your palette is too messed up, just throw it away, get a new paper plate and start again. I think I'll start again with the palette knife and I'll mix up a green Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I want this green to be a little bit more cool. I want it to be a little bit more on the blue side. I'm gonna squeeze out just a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Opaque. I can just put it right here. I really like to use just a little bit of paint on the palette. I don't mind having to come back in and re-add some paint, but I'm such a saver and I hate wasting too much. So in the first, I don't think that I talked about the brush that I used on the background. Let me go ahead and grab it out of my water over here. I used a 14 for doing the background, and it's just a nice size, not too big, but for the background where you want some of that sketchy, loose brush stroke, a larger brush is nice. I'm going to, for the leaves, I think I'm going to go ahead and size down to a 10. This brush is well loved. I use it a lot. So let's just go ahead and start to base in our leaves. And actually thinking maybe before I start, maybe I'll go ahead and mix up some of the pink that we're going to use. So a little bit of the Pyrrole Red. I'm going to put out a little bit of quinacridone magenta. Again, I probably should have shook these before I started. Um, it's one of the things you don't have to do with the heavy body paints. I'll set out just a little bit more of the burnt sienna too. I think that I want to add in some of the variation of the pinks within these leaves as well. So having just a little bit of it mixed up will probably help us. So quinacridone magenta and naphthol red light will give us um, a really nice red color. And then I'll pick up some of the titanium white. I think that that's good enough to get started. I can always add in more of the titanium white as we go. I'll just put a little pile of that over to the side too. Since this leaf is more in the background, I think I'll go ahead and start there. So I'm not worried about going over the edges of any of this. The nice thing about the engraved panel is that you'll be able to see those engraved marks. I just dipped into a little bit more of the phthalo blue just to darken that green. I want it to be pretty dark underneath of these the colored leaves. I forget what the red and pink leaves on the poinsettia are called. I actually looked that up this morning. It's kind of fun to research what you're painting a little bit. Are they called bracts or something like that? So they're really just another variation of a leaf. Okay, in that section, I just based in this leaf that pushes behind some of the other poinsettia leaves that are in front of it. So it's this very same green that we mixed before, just a little bit more of the phthalo and a little bit more of the burnt sienna to darken it. And I hope that you can see that it has some variations. It has some lighter colors. All of those variations really help us as we go forward. I'm going to go ahead and pull out another brush just so I don't have to clean the brush with the green as often. You can certainly clean your brush, but using two brushes is sometimes nice, um, so you don't spend so much time cleaning brushes. And I'm just going to mix up a little bit of a pink color. I added in a little bit of the green just to, again, tone it down a little bit, but I want to add just some hints of some pink coming into these green leaves. And it's going to look a little bit weird when we first start, but just trust the process, just have fun with it. I can come back in and lightly stroke through. I love the variations in the leaves of the poinsettia. I think that the way that the pinks, sometimes even purples and burgundies show through is really fun. So I'm going to leave that one there. We might, as we come in and build in some highlights, it's possible that we'll cover all of that up, and never worry about that. I never mind repainting an area because all of those layers build up so much pretty color that it's never wasted time to come back in and repaint areas if you happen to lose an area. So I'll start on this leaf here, just being a little bit more careful on the edge, but remember, we don't need for it to be perfect. These are hand painted pieces, and all of the little wobbles and inconsistencies will be beautiful in the end. So just try to relax. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't worry about it. Even though this is a kind of a big brush, I can turn it and get in to some of those little areas too. If you go over that engraved line, that's perfectly fine. In fact, going over it a little bit ensures that you cover it. So I'll go back to some of that dark that we had before. So just a little bit more of the phthalo blue, a little bit more of the burnt sienna, and build in some of the dark shape at the top here. I feel like the paint is fighting me just a little bit. It's not, um, creating that dark that I want to here. So if you experience that, just walk away from that, let it dry, move on to a different area, and we'll come back to it. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward as I set in just the base of the remainder of the leaves, and then we'll come back and add some more details to one of them just so that you can see how we can begin to build these shapes. Okay, so that gives us our first layer, just a first look of the basin of the leaves. I'm going to go ahead and move up to this final leaf up here and paint that with you mostly in real time so that you get um, really a step-by-step feel for how these leaves are coming together. Um, I will say that everything on my palette is drying really quickly today. So, it's interesting how that happens sometimes. I don't know, what it is with the weather. I know that in the winter with the heater on and everything, um, that can affect our paints, but that's again another reason why just putting out small bits of paint is really nice. If a little bit dries, we can just put out a little bit more and it's fine. So I'll just start with a basic green, and I'm going to be very loose with letting the colors vary. I know that if you're just starting out painting, it can be a little bit overwhelming to think, oh, I've got to mix that very same color again, and what if I can't? I know I've spent so much time myself feeling that way, but the reality is that the variations are good. Those are the what we want. So I never worry anymore about feeling like I've got to mix that exact color. Embrace those different variations and let some of them happen even from the very first brushstrokes that you're making. So I'll add a little bit more of the phthalo, a little bit more of the burnt sienna to darken it, and begin to add that in right down here where it will be a little bit darker. I don't know what happened to my voice there. So vary the color again on my brush just a little bit. So you can see with very little, it's really fine just as it is. It's beautiful like that. Let's add in a little bit of the pink. Got a little bit too much green still on my brush. Let me dip it in the airbrush medium, blot it out on my towel over here, and get most of that out. I want some of the green just to mute the pink a little bit, just not too much. We'll add just a little bit of the hint of some pink coming into these leaves up here. And then I'll go back into the green again, just a little bit too much pink in my brush. That's really where having two brushes is kind of nice. You don't, fight with too much of one color in your brush. And I need a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Opaque again. Just a couple more dots. Probably need a little bit more of the burnt sienna too, but let's see. I'm gonna wipe out the brush a little bit. I'm always thinking about controlling the amount of paint that's in my brush. It's one of those things that it's hard to learn, maybe. You just begin to get the feel for how much paint you want in your brush. If you're fighting with how the paint is going down on your piece, then pinch wipe it out your brush just so you have a little bit more control. If I feel like it got too light, I can dip back into the dark again. So it's just very, very loose. I think I am going to come back in. These leaves are beginning to dry some. So I'm going to mix up a lighter version of this sage green that we've been using. Put out a little bit more of the burnt sienna. I'll just drop it right on top of where the burnt sienna was before. Want a really soft green. This might be too light, but let's try it and see. Yeah, it's just a little too light. I just need a little bit more of the blue, a little bit more of the burnt sienna. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, that's better. I hope that you could see there when I took that first stroke of paint with that color that I mixed, I just touched it to my piece once just to get a feel for what the color was. And then after that, I could make adjustments to that color. It's easy to make the mistake of just continuing to paint with the wrong color. If you touch it to your piece and you feel like it's wrong, go back to your palette and just mix up a little bit more color. I want a darker green. So it's really just about playing back and forth between the colors, letting some variations happen. I want some of those highlights to come in. And this is really where you just want to take your time, just have fun with it. Um, Try some different things, see what you like, what works. I'm gonna build up the edge of this one just a little bit with some lighter green. And then I'll wipe that out of my brush and come back in and grab some of the mid green again that we have. And now as I'm coming back in, I'm making sure that I follow the direction of the veins of the leaves. So it always looks a little bit scary when you first lay in that light. It looks like it's too much light. Don't worry about that. Let it be too light if it is, and then come back in and touch into it with your other green mixtures, and you can always settle it in. So I'm going to fast forward and just spend a little bit of time just enjoying painting the leaves. This really is just a time of the painting where you just relax and have fun with it, build up the layers, and it will look beautiful when we get all finished. Okay, I think that I'm going to call these leaves done for now. Um, I really like how they're looking. I like the variation that they have in them. You saw me at the very end of that fast forward clip. Come back in and soften a little bit of this. I don't want it to be too outlined. So I just came in with a mixture of green that we've been using that was not the darkest green, just something that would kind of settle that shadow down. So let's go ahead and work on this top one up here. Again, this is completely optional. It's beautiful as it is, and you don't have to do any more. But I do like to come back in and do a few more layers on the top, more um, thicker paint, more intentional brush strokes, just to build it up a little bit. So that same mixture, Hansa Yellow Opaque, a little bit of the Phthalo Blue, a little bit of the Burnt Sienna, and coming in and just using a little bit more of the brush, a little bit more pressure, letting some of those colors come off. And this goes back to what I mentioned before about never worrying about covering up something that I did before or reworking an area. Generally, when artists get frustrated and think that it's just not going to come together, it's really because they just stopped just moments too soon. If they had just put one more layer on, it probably would have come together perfectly for them. So keep that in mind as you're painting. Just don't give up. Keep going back in, building up colors, vary the color just a little bit. See if I can grab a little bit of titanium white just to lighten it a little bit. A little bit lighter pressure here with those highlights. Now I can wipe out the brush, get my brush mostly clean. I just looked up at how messy my hands are. I make a mess when I paint, and I love it. I love just diving into it. I think that that's good. It's good just the way it is. I think that the only thing I want to do is dip into a little bit more of the burnt sienna and phthalo blue, and I just want to darken it one more time right down here where it really gets into the more the depths of the plant. And while I have that on my brush, I'll use the opportunity to go ahead and walk it around to some of those other areas too. Dip into the airbrush medium, get most of the paint out of my brush, and then just come back in and run along those areas where I just added that darker color, just to soften the edge of that. And since everything else is dry on that leaf, when I come back in, I'm only affecting just what's wet, just that darker shadow color that we just put in. So at this stage, the thing to do really is to move on to the flowered leaves. I need to look that up again. Brox. So the flower, the technical flower, is just these center little buds that come up in the center. The colored leaves are just a variation of the green leaf. I just think that they're so interesting. I just love the color in the leaves. So I do think before we end this video, what I might do is go ahead and touch into that center area with this dark that we mixed. I am going to go ahead and pick up one of my little round brushes, and I will link these here too. If you've watched the other Everyday Art Series classes, you know that I love really cheap brushes. And for 99% of my paintings, whether they're the big 24 by 30 painting or the little pieces, I really just use a filbert set and then a round brush set. So I'm going to dip into the airbrush medium, just wet the bristles of the brush, and see if I can get any of the burnt sienna and phthalo blue. It's mostly just burnt sienna and phthalo blue. And I'm just going to tap this color down into the center of these flowers. This will give me a foundation to build on when I come back in and add. I'm going to add some pinks, some bright pops of yellow down here. I'm going to go ahead and set out just a little bit more burnt sienna. I have a bad habit of getting in a hurry and not just taking the time to set out a little more paint. It's very convenient, especially with the little fluid acrylics. It's so easy just to pop open the lid, put a little bit more paint out rather than struggle with it. So it's nothing specific here, just giving myself a little bit of a darker center so that some of my other elements, when we add them in, will show up. I like it. It looks very pretty. So the next step is just to come back in with the pinks and do the petals of this poinsettia. I am really looking forward to seeing some of the pinks come on this piece. I think that that will really show us how everything else is working. So be watching for that class. All of the classes are in this playlist, and I will make sure that the next class is always linked so that you can easily find the next part. Welcome back to the studio. We're ready to start painting the petals of our poinsettia. As I mentioned, I'm planning to do mine as a pink poinsettia, so let's jump in and have some fun painting. I've grabbed just a little bit of a smaller filbert here. This is a size 6. I think that this is where I'm going to start for painting our poinsettia petals. And I'm going to start with a sort of a mid-tone pink. My idea here is to set in a base of a mid color so that I can come back in with some lighter pinks, and having that base of the darker pink will begin to build in some of the veining of our petals that we want to have. So I'm going to grab quinacridone magenta, the naphthol red light, some of the titanium white. This brush is very wiggly. I do not take care of my brushes at all. I like to just paint, I like to not have to be finicky about my brushes. So I'm continuing to kind of mix down and make sure I don't want this to be too too dark so that I have to fight how dark it is later. I'm actually going to change the brush here. I don't know if you can see it as I paint, but the ferrule of this brush is just very, very wiggly. I might see if I can fix it by adding in a little bit of glue or something. If anybody knows how to fix a wiggly ferrule, please let me know. Just going to get this brush wet. Looks like this brush might need some hand sanitizer. I don't know if you guys know that trick, but if you have a brush that dries a little bit, gets a little bit too much dried paint on it, you can use hand sanitizer, and the alcohol in the hand sanitizer will clean that paint out. Let's see. I want to be able to add just a little bit of green into this too, in order to tone the pink a little bit. So I just dipped into the phthalo blue and a little bit of the Hansa yellow opaque. And I'll just bring that in. You can see it kind of grays the pink a little bit. Let's see how that looks. I kind of like that. It's almost like it almost gives it a little bit of a purple tint, which is fun. I think I want it just a little bit darker down in here, where it's just this little sliver really recesses into the plant a little bit. And as I've mentioned a lot in this class already, you don't have to be particular here. I'm um, allowing I'm just painting just that section just so I can see where these petals are. If you get a little bit onto the other petals, it's no problem. Just let it happen. I kind of like that pink that I have, and actually I'm going to go ahead and add that to our color mix worksheet so that I can remember it. So I just touched into just a little bit more of the titanium white there, just to vary the color a little bit. And I think that, that's good enough for this first go through. Let's go ahead and work on this big petal here. And we have some decisions that we can make. I'm going to have this little petal, this small teardrop shape, come in front. So I want this petal to go back behind. I'm going to put out a tiny bit more of the phthalo blue. I like to darken the pinks with a little bit of the phthalo. You can also darken with a little bit of the burnt sienna, which we still have out here. I probably should have put out a little bit more titanium white, but we'll see how it goes here. I'm gonna step off to the side. The phthalo, it always surprises me how how powerful the phthalo it really is. I'm gonna dip into a little bit of the burnt sienna too, just to soften that. I really like what the burnt sienna just did there. That was a good addition to sort of mute that blue a little bit. A little purpler. It's a little bit more purple than I really want it. So I'm just going to dip into a little bit more of the naphthol red, which just brightens it a little bit. Then I'm going to add some titanium white and just begin to vary the colors a little bit. Not details here, just our base, just enough variation so that our eye can begin to pick out the petal shape coming together. As a general rule, follow the veining of the leaves. It's no problem to run your brush like I just did along the edge. You just want to come back in and make sure that your brush strokes that go over the top of that um, follow the shape a little bit better. I just dipped into a little bit more of the titanium white. What I'm trying to do here really is just to cover those engraved lines. You could see there just a little bit of the color that was in my brush coming out. Let those things happen. Don't panic if you see a little bit of a green or a little bit more of the phthalo coming out. So that was a little bit of the lighter color. You saw me dip back in and grab a little bit of that darker version. This is why having all of those variations on your palette really is really nice. I don't know if you can see, but because of this mixture, there's a little bit of a more of a purple haze happening down here, and I really like it. I'm going to let it happen. I'm going to let that one dry a little bit. I'm going to come in and do this little top one that we were just talking about before. Just wiped my brush out a little bit. I could see just a little bit too much paint being pushed around by my brush. So by just wiping it really quick, I can get some of that paint out of my brush. I'm going to add just a little bit of the titanium white. I just basically dipped into pure titanium white. Um, Again, just to give my eye a little bit to work with there. The back of this petal does go underneath of this one. So let's go ahead and just darken that area a little bit. Just taking my time with the mixture, just trying to get a color that's just a little bit deeper back there. I think while I have it, I'm going to put it underneath of this petal too. Maybe tap into this area again. And then I'll wipe out the brush and then just come back in and just run the mostly clean brush along the edge. I could feel it pulling a little bit, so I'll just dip into the airbrush medium just to loosen it a little bit. And now I'll come back into the lighter color and just go over the top of it, just building the shape of those petals a little bit. So I just did that a little bit of the lighter pink, mostly clean brush, a little bit of airbrush medium. Just gonna run along some of those edges. And like I mentioned before, my paint is drying really quickly. So don't wait too long. If you do want to come back in and soften anything. It's better to do it pretty quickly. However, don't panic because we can always let it dry and come back in again. So I am going to go ahead and fast forward from here. I'm going to finish painting in just the basing in of the petals. And then when we come back together again, we will put some of the lighter highlights on each one of these petals. So I hope you enjoyed watching that rest of the petals kind of come together. Um, it really is a process of going back and forth between the darks and the lights, and do that as many times as you need to. The important thing at this stage is don't build up any texture in your paint at this point. So keep the paint fairly spread out, fairly thin. When we come back in for the final highlights and the final details, that's where we'll make a little bit more texture with our paint. It's not that we're looking for texture to show up, but allowing the paint to just be a little bit thicker. So the petals are a little bit rough here, but this is exactly the base that I need to be able to come back in and build those final highlights. And it's important at this stage to really just pause and let it dry, and then we'll come back in with the final details. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to mention. I know there was something else. I was going to say that, again, my paints are drying incredibly fast, kind of shockingly fast, really. Um, but I will say that I went ahead and invested in a bigger container of the titanium white. I know you will use that much more than any other color. And like I mentioned before, also the Hansa Yellow Opaque, those two colors are just, you just use more of them. So let's go ahead and start to do the middle, the poinsettia flower part. And I just mixed just a light green color. Um, we're going to just use a couple of variations of this. So the Hansa Yellow Opaque, Hansa Yellow Opaque, Phthalo Blue. I don't know why words have been so hard today. And again, just my little round brush, and I'm just going to dot in some of this lighter green. I don't have to be really specific here, just adding in some variations of color in the centers. Now I'll come back in, get a little bit of a darker green. So I'm just pulling just a little bit more of that blue in. I'll just tap that around, just loosely, just for the variation. And I can even take that into that dark area that we set in before. I'm seeing a really dark area here that I missed before. I might go ahead and just really quickly with some quinacridone magenta, phthalo blue, a little bit of the burnt sienna if I still have any that's wet, just for a dark color to fill in this little opening back here. I'll go ahead and clean my brush out a little bit just by dipping it in the airbrush medium and blotting it on my towel. And then I'll come back in and just pick up some just straight Hansa Yellow Opaque. And I'm just going to dot that in. And then I think what I'll do is make a little bit of an orange tone. So the Hansa Yellow Opaque and a little bit of the Naphthol Red, or this is Pyrrole Red. Pyrrole Red is just eating up my yellow. And I'll just tap in a couple of these orange spots. If you need to let the yellow dry here, go ahead and do that, just to so that the orange can have an impact and not mess up the yellow that you just put in. And then the last thing I think I'm going to do is I want just a little bit of a pop of pink in there, I think. And it probably is better at this point to let this dry. I'm going to show you since we're here. But for you, if you want to let it dry so that this pink really shows up, it's probably the better plan. Just trying to mix a pink that will show up here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to let it dry, I think. I'll let it dry. It's just a little bit too wet. But you can see just by tapping in, you really have enough detail there. When we come back in and add some of the pink on some of the edges, that will soften some of the yellow just a little bit, but we need to let it dry. I thought I could maybe muscle it in there, but it doesn't want to go. So that is all for this section. The last section that we'll do, the last video that we'll do, is just coming back in and adding some of the highlights on the petals. That's when these are really going to start to pop and really start to show their beauty. At this point, I'm going to take this upstairs while I go feed the dogs their lunch. And I'm just going to spend some time looking at it, seeing where I want to come in and make some changes, where I want to maybe soften a leaf a little bit on the edge. But I really, really suggest that you do that. Just to take some time, see it just in your normal environment as you walk past it. See what kind of stands out. What stands out in a good way and what stands out in a bothering way. And then you'll know when you come back to your table to paint again, you'll know some of the areas that you want to focus on. Remember that um, it's we need to we need to follow the process. So don't give up. It's so easy at this stage. And I hope you can see, how unfinished these petals are. Just keep going. Don't give up. You're so close to it here. And the next part is going to be so much fun. To be honest, I really had a lot of fun just with the petals. I really just relaxed. I hope you can see some of the different variations of colors that are coming in here. And I hope that on yours, you will really let that happen. Some of the areas that are a little bit more of a red pink, some of the areas that are a little bit more of a purple pink, and all of those variations are going to be so much fun. If you're painting this at this stage and you're just wondering, am I on the right track? Send me a message, show me a picture, and I'm happy to help. I really think that one of the best things that we can do as artists is to show another artist what we're working on and see what they think. Sometimes we're just so close to it that we can't really evaluate it well ourselves. And I've learned so much over the years in sharing my pieces and just getting a feedback, just a little bit of feedback from a friend. So don't hesitate to do that. Send a picture to a friend. Honestly, just taking a picture of it and looking at the picture yourself will really help too. So I hope you enjoyed this part. Painting the pinks was so much fun. I will see you at the next part where we'll do some of the details. Welcome back to the studio. I spent a little bit of time with the piece, like I mentioned that I was going to do at the end of the last part of this class. And I have some things that I want to change. And um, the great thing about wanting to change is that it's easy to do. I really feel like the background maybe got a little bit more yellow than I want it to be. So I'm going to come in and adjust that. I'm going to add a few shadows around the poinsettia in some strategic places to hopefully make it feel a little less like it's floating. And then, of course, I want to come in and do some of the fun final details. So let's jump in and make some changes. Okay, I did mist my little paper plate palette here before I went upstairs. So some things are still a little bit wet. I'm going to dip into the airbrush medium and mix up a little bit of this green that I want to use. Um, like I said, I just I really feel like the background got a little bit more yellow than I want it to be. So I just want a soft green tone to come back in. So I've got the Hansa Yellow Opaque, a little bit of the Phthalo Blue, some of the Titanium White. And like I mentioned before, anytime I mix a color and come onto my piece, I'm going to be making a decision right away on whether or not I like that. It's just a little bit too blue. So I'm going to add in a little bit more of the yellow, add in a little bit more of the titanium white, just dip the tip of the bristles into the airbrush medium and just keep adjusting it until I get it closer to where I want it to be. I'm going to get some of this paint out of my brush. Like I mentioned before, that's when you brush mix, you get a lot of paint in your brush. I'm going to put out a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Opaque. I feel like it's closer, but I'm just a touch shy on the Hansa Yellow Opaque. It really is just a fine tuning it, just little increments of color. Yeah, I think that that's better. So I'm just going to dot this around just really loosely and grab a little bit more of the titanium white. I'm not doing a very good job of keeping the tops of my lids cleaned off. As you do yours, you'll probably do better at wiping those as you um, pour paint. So just dipping into the titanium white, I can come back in and loosely soften those brush strokes that I made. I don't want to cover up all of what I had before. Some of that um, some of that glow from the yellow is fine. I just felt like there was just a little too much. That little bit that I just added there was just a little bit more of the pure titanium white. Again, I've got color on the brush, so even though I picked up pure titanium white, it's putting down other colors that are left over in my brush. This dried a little bit down here while I was getting out more titanium white. Don't worry about that. Just pick up a little bit more of that color, set it in, then pick up more of the titanium white and spread it around. If you haven't painted with acrylic paints in a while, it can be a little bit difficult to learn not to stress out about the paint drying. Um, sorry for the noisy dogs. Anyway, don't worry about the paint drying a little bit. Sometimes, and you've heard me say it before, I purposefully wait to let it dry just so I have more control. So don't stress out if it seems to be drying. I don't know what the dogs think that they've heard. Between the dogs and the cats today, it's kind of been a mess. I'm gonna bring in just a little bit more green. Honestly, misting the palette when I went upstairs really did help the palette quite a bit. I probably should have done that before. Um, this setup for painting is a little bit different. As I mentioned, um, I generally paint with heavy body paints. I've really been enjoying these fluid acrylics a lot. Um, but it's just a different process. So um, it's kind of fun to try different things, and it kind of gets you out of your um, comfort zone a little bit, which can seem a little bit scary, but it's really, I think it's really what opens creativity up when you know, broaden your horizons a little bit. So it's all just, it's funny the little things that we kind of forget to do, like misting the palette would have been so easy. And I think this morning as I was filming, I must have said, 15 times, wow, the paint's drying a lot faster than I expected it to. So just a little tip. And I do have the little fine spray mist bottle that I like listed in um, the links for this class. So um, the little continuous spray bottle is just a really great tool to have. It's pretty inexpensive and really helpful. So I'm just going to keep working on this background a little bit. I'm going to try to remember to take some of this onto the sides too, just to carry some of that color around more. It did take a little bit of mixing. You saw me mix for a little while. Just, don't give up. Keep just making small incremental changes until you get the color that that really is working. So I'm going to fast forward it here and finish up these little additions to these little changes to the background. And then we will start on some of the fun details on the leaves and um, the petals of the poinsettia. Okay, I made just a real simple adjustment. I really like it a lot better. I did end up taking out most of the yellow, so when you do yours, you might choose to leave out the yellow too. There is a little bit of a glow from it, so it's not a wasted time spent painting it, but we can't know exactly how everything is going to turn out. We have to be willing to kind of go with the flow and make some adjustments. So I think in this next section, what I want to do is add a little bit more, highlight a little bit more detail to the leaves. So I'm going to get out, let's see what size this brush is. Size 2? It looks bigger than a size 2, honestly. But every brush company, can size and name their sizes like they want. Just not a tiny brush, but a small-ish brush. And I'll come back in, mix up some more of this green. While I'm thinking about it, I'm just going to give my palette just a little spray. Hopefully that will help keep things wet. And I'm going to go ahead and put out a little bit more burnt sienna. And seems like there was some more titanium white. Just the teeniest touch of the burnt sienna. Let's decide where we want to make some changes. I want to really manage how much paint is in my brush. My brush is still a little bit wet. I can see that the paint strokes that I'm making are a little bit more transparent than I want them to be. So it just means that there's a little bit extra water. Um, that is kind of the drawback when you spray your palette. You get some little pockets of water. It's no problem. Just keep working it and keep adding more layers until you get it the way that you like it. Well, this is really the fun part for me. You have all of the shapes there. You know it's all going to work well. Now it's just a matter of making some of those final little changes that bring it all together. I lost my titanium white for a second. It's like, where did it go? It gets like that toward the end of a painting where you have so much happening on your palette. I wanted to soften some of the edges of the leaves just a little bit, make them a little bit more like the background. It'll just give the whole piece, um, it'll settle it in a little bit better. Um, it's easy when we're painting to feel like everything has to be its own color in order to stand out, but really using similar colors really kind of helps you know, here where the leaf is more similar to the background, it just softens it just naturally. I want to darken an area a little bit. So I'll bring in some burnt sienna, a little bit of the phthalo, a little bit of that yellow, just to make a darker green tone. A bit too much burnt sienna, so I'll bring in a little more phthalo. And then get most of that paint out of my brush and dip into the airbrush medium and blot it out, and then just run those colors together. Pinks are getting a little bit lost, but just assessing, just trying to decide if I want to add them back in. I think about 5 times today I've hit the side of my painting with my brush and had to come back in and fix things. So you can see how just continually varying the tones. Bring in some of the lighter colors, bring in some of the mid-green colors, bring in a little bit of the dark color, and you just keep building those colors back and forth until you reach the effect that you are going for. I really like how that looks. I think I'm going to bring back in a little bit of the pink. See if I still have any workable paint here. So I'm just going to dot that in, mostly clean the brush of the pink, and then touch against those edges to settle it in. And even on this pink, it can be a really good idea to vary that tone a little bit. So bring in a little bit of a darker pink in some places. So you can dip into the quinacridone magenta and just touch. Clean the brush. Yeah, that looks pretty. If you add in the pink and you decide that you don't love it, it's just a little bit too much for you, you can always come back in with a little bit of a glaze over the top of it. A little, you could mix like a green, um, what are the words? The words have really been hard today. A little bit of a green, sort of the green and a little bit of the phthalo, a little bit of the burnt sienna, really thin it down, and then just wash back over it, just a little glaze to go back over it. That got way brighter than I wanted it to. I'll just touch back over it with a little bit of the quinacridone magenta. Mostly clean out my brush. Come back over to the greens, which I'm running out of again. I'm going to end up mostly covering that because what I put down really got a little bit dry even um, before I could get the yellow out. But I actually kind of like that, just that little bit that you can see just barely peeking through. In fact, I like it so much that I think I'm going to come back over here. It's mostly dry. You can see how going over it just leaves just that little bit of a hint that that there's some color back there. And since the green that I just put on is just a little bit damp still, that all those colors are kind of working together. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward from here. I'm going to do a few more just relaxed details on the leaves just to bring them together. And then when we come back together, we'll start adding some of the details to the poinsettia leaves. Okay, I'm going to call the leaves done here. We could come back in and do a little bit more with a round on the veining, but I really feel like you get enough of a sense of the veining on the leaves as they are. So I'm not going to do anything more with that. Um, like I said earlier, how much detail you want to put into yours is completely up to you. You don't have to do any of the pinks that I've done, but truly, if you'll just spend some time going back and forth between the different values, you can see kind of a mess of all kinds of different greens that are going on my palette, and a very messy, very messy hand. But dive in and get messy and have fun. It really is so much fun. I think before I go to my pinks, I'm going to turn my rag and get a little bit more of a clean spot. Um, because sometimes when we're working on a towel like this, it can have some wet paint, and when you wipe off your brush, you can make a mess. You'll have green introduced to your pink that you hadn't planned on. So let's go ahead. I'm going to get some more titanium white out, more pyrrole red, more of the quinacridone magenta. Looks like that one might be a little bit wet still. And let's mix up a pink that we can use on our poinsettia petals here. Let me see if I can find a brush that I want to use. Grabbed a size 8. Anything will work. Size 8, size 6. I just want it to be big enough that I can make some bolder highlight strokes. So I'm going to bring a little bit of the red, a little bit of the quinacridone magenta over and start to mix up a pink. And I'm going to grab a little bit of the burnt sienna. Just want to tone it down a little bit. I always worry when I say tone it down that that's confusing. All I mean when I say tone it down is make it not be such a stark pink, but more of a soft pink. Let's see what this color looks like. It looks pretty good. My brush was a little bit over full, so I just blotted a little bit of that off. Bring a little bit more quinacridone over here, just to give me a little bit of a different variation. I really didn't like that at all. It just ended up being a little bit more more purpley than I really want it to be here. Just giving myself lots of little variations of color to work with. Now that I have some of that color down, I can just dip into basically pure titanium white. And come in and touch along those areas that I painted before. Now I'm going to clean out my brush, mostly, again, just dipping into the airbrush medium and blotting it out. I'm just going to drag through some of those areas just to pull it together a little bit. I felt like it got a little bit too light there, so I'll pick up a little bit more paint. Lighten up the edges of this petal over here. It looks pretty good. I'm going to fast forward from here and just spend some time on the petals. Um, Again, it's going to be exactly like we did with the leaves, just going back and forth between the colors. Some of these petals that are toward the back, like this one, I don't know that I want to bother that one too much. I like it the way that it is. I really just want to bump up the highlights on the petals that I really want to bring forward. I'm going to call this done for today. And again, spend a little bit of time with it this evening, just trying to make sure that I have everything the way that I want it to be. I do think that I want to come back in and bump up some of the highlights just a little bit more, but I want to let it dry and see how things settle in. Um, as acrylic paints dry, they do dry a little bit darker. So it's good to take a little bit of a break, spend a little bit of time with it, and see if there's anything else that we want to add to it. Um, the big thing with this piece is be patient. Just take your time going back and forth. If we feel like there's just a little bit too much of brush strokes going on, if it's a little too busy, we can come back in and soften it with some real simple brush strokes later just to smooth it a little bit. But I don't want to make any rash decisions now. It's been a long day of painting. I've painted for about 5 hours altogether today. So it's good if you've spent some time like that painting to take a break, look at it with fresh eyes tomorrow, and see if there's anything else that you want to do to it. So I'll come back tomorrow and revisit this with you a little bit, look at it a little bit closer, and see if there's anything else that we want to do besides put our little artist mark on it. Um, there's a lot going on. It seems, when you sit down to do a poinsettia piece, it seems like it's pretty simple, but there's a lot of different values, a lot of different things going on. So spend some time going back and forth. And if you're getting frustrated at all with it at any point, take a break, walk away from it, and then come back. You'll be amazed at what just a little bit of a break can do. Let things dry, and then I promise you're closer than you think that you are. Um, it is good to take some pictures of it. I've been looking at the computer screen here as I've been painting to see how it's all coming together. Um, for you, just get out your iPhone, take a picture of it, and see if there's anything that really stands out to you as something that needs to be fixed. The same thing holds true with just spending some time with it. I'll put it on a little display easel on my island and spend a little bit of time looking at it, but it's very close to being done here. I spent a little bit of time with our poinsettia painting last night, and I really like it. I was worried that some of the paint strokes might be a little bit too busy, but really when I stepped back from it, I realized that they were really fine. And that's really the issue when we're in the studio, when we're up close to our pieces, it's hard to judge sometimes what's really working. We really need to spend that time. I always put it in a little display on my island and just catch glimpses of it as I walk by and begin to see it a little bit more clearly, the way that our customers will when they purchase our pieces, or the way that our family will when we give the piece as a gift. There was one little thing that I wanted to make an adjustment on, and that is just some of the shadows I felt like were a little bit too dark and taking away from the piece a little bit. So in this video, we're going to mix up some more of our pink. I'm going to show you again the pink that I think is best for this particular painting, and we'll make a couple of little adjustments. So let's get started. So here's our piece as we left it last evening. And really, the areas that were kind of bothering me are how dark this particular veining is on this bract. I felt like this petal, this bract that goes back behind, is a little bit dark. And then particularly these two petals or bracts over here were a little bit dark and standing out to me. So I just want to soften those shadows a little bit. And it's very easy to come back in and just make some little adjustments. I have out on my palette here a little bit of the pyrrole red, some quinacridone magenta, a little bit of burnt sienna. These three colors I found for what I was going through on my piece, what I was going for on my piece. These three make a really nice pink. And then a little bit of titanium white, of course. And as I was studying this and trying to think about the best way to share with all of you how to judge your values in your paintings, I made for you a free download, a little value scale that you can print off and use to study what value your colors are. And I know that sometimes when artists start talking about values and figuring out what the value number is, that can sound very detailed and technical and a little scary, maybe, but don't let it be scary. It really is just a way for your eye to start seeing what those different values are. And it's also a way for us to talk, where if I say something is a value 2, you can look at the value scale and go, oh, right. Shelley's talking about that value. Remember, value is just how dark or light a color is. So this is just a grayscale value scale, and I have it laminated so that I can touch the paint onto each of these little areas whenever I'm studying what that color is, and then easily be able to wipe it off and reuse it. So if you'd like to grab that, it's for free. I'll put the link in this video for you so that you can grab it. I'm going to start out with a size 6 filbert brush and just mix up some of our pink. So I'm just going to pull together the quinacridone magenta and the pyrrole red, pull in a little bit of burnt sienna. This is that brush that I was talking about in a previous video that is a little bit loose in the ferrule. And then I can start to bring in some titanium white. You can see that I stepped off. I'm sorry for the glare. I stepped off a little bit so that I have lots of different colors here. And another thing that I think I'd like to do while I'm making some adjustments is amp up some of the highlights on a couple of the petals as well. So let's see where this color is. And since we have the value scale here, let's just touch some paint to it and see what value this lighter pink is. And we can study it by just tapping the paint onto our piece, onto the scale, and just seeing where does it disappear? Where does it look like it sort of melts into the color? And really you can see the pink looks darker here than the background. It's getting a little bit closer. We're somewhere between a value 5 and a value 6 there. And I really think for the shadows that I want to have, that a value 5 or a value 6 is probably about right. I want to get out a little bit of that mixed color from my brush. Dip into a little bit of airbrush medium. When I dip into the airbrush medium, that just makes my paint a little bit more translucent. And translucent paint, when we're coming in to make some little changes, is really nice to have. So I'm just going to touch along this dark shadow that was sort of bothering me. Add in just a tiny bit more burnt sienna. And let's see if I want to come up here, maybe just a little bit, just kind of lightly touching. You can see how easily, even though all of the background is dry, how easily we can just soften it just a little bit. I'm going to come over here and soften this a little bit too. You'll hear artists many times talking about this kind of a process as a glaze. And the glaze just means that some of the colors underneath are still showing through. I'm going to tap into the little bit of the darker there. I want it to not be too purple there. So by doing that glaze, some of the color underneath still shows through. It's very forgiving. We can just scrub into that area and just make subtle little changes without having to reinvent it all. We don't I think that a lot of times artists give up too quickly and they think, oh, it's ruined and I have to start all over. No, you don't. You can come back in and just make some little adjustments with some transparent paint and fix it right up. Let's go ahead and do this little petal down here. I'm gonna tap into just a little bit more of the white. And I'm going to go ahead and blot out the brush and then just run the brush back along there. And I'm going to adjust this dark shadow here. It became a little bit more purple than I think I want it to be. So I'm just adding a little bit more of the burnt sienna to the quinacridone magenta. Touching along there, blot out the brush. I can dip it into the airbrush medium and blot it out on my towel. And then just dip just the bristles of the brush, just the tiny tip of the brush into the airbrush medium again, just to give you a little bit of moisture on the brush to be able to pull those colors together. I'm just trying here to touch back into it once again. I just don't want it to look like a straight line of shadow right there. So mostly clean brush again with just a little airbrush medium, and I can just kind of scrub between those two colors. I think that looks really good. I think I just want to add just a little more light onto the edge. Yeah, that looks nice. I hope you can see just how easy these little changes really are. It can seem like it can seem a little scary when you come back in to touch up, but start out with that very transparent paint that is really thinned out with the airbrush medium. And the great thing is that everything underneath of this is dry. So if you really just hated something, you'd be able to just, um, wipe it off. You can just lift it back off. Airbrush medium, get most of the paint out of my brush, and then come back in and soften the edges. So even though that paint underneath is dry, I can still soften the edges of the paint that I just added into that dried paint. Let's go ahead and come down to these that were kind of bothering me. So that was a little bit more of the mostly quinacridone magenta and burnt sienna. You can see already just that little bit really helped that. I don't have very much paint in my brush here at all, but it's honestly just enough to cover some of those areas. Let's go ahead and dip into the lighter highlights again and make some simple highlight strokes. Clean out my brush a little bit, get most of the paint out. And then I'm going to come back through and just try to soften this a little so it doesn't look like such a harsh line there. I think that looks really good. A little bit of this lighter color. Even today, the paint is drying so fast on my palette. Most of the paint out of my brush and come in and soften those together a little bit. If it dried a little too fast, then just come back in with some light again. And at this point, now I feel like, and I'm going to just point it out so that you can see it here. The transition from the shadow that we have, the lightened shadow that we just did, and this highlight that I put on just now, there's too big of a range. There's too big of a difference in the value. So I want to come back in with something that's in between, not this color and not this color, but right in the middle of that. And that will help me bring that together a little bit better. So let's mix something that's a little darker to bring those together. Most of the paint out of my brush, just a little airbrush medium left, and then just touch along those strokes to soften them together a little. That looks really pretty. I think that the last thing that I want to do is just come in with some brighter whites, some brighter highlights on the edge. And I talked about this in one of the last videos that as the paint dries, it can dry a little bit darker than what you're seeing when you're in the studio. And even as the paint cures, um, even when your acrylic paint is dry to the touch, it's still curing and changing underneath. And so you can see some changes in colors, and often you'll want to come back to your studio or to your painting table and um, add some either brighter highlights or darker shadows after everything has kind of set up. So I'm just going to pick out a couple of areas that I really want to beef up a little bit with just a little bit more of a highlight. If your paint as you're painting this on dries too quickly, you might want to have just a second brush in your hand so that you can come back with a clean brush and tap along the edges just to bring it together a little. And so we'll just continue that process, just picking out a couple of places where we want a little bit more of a highlight. I don't have to get rid of all of the brush strokes. I just want to make sure that it looks like it belongs there. It looks like it's not floating off. Maybe a little bit up here. That paint got just a little bit too transparent. For these whites, before when we were doing the little adjustments where we were thinning out the paint to have more of a glaze, for these highlights, I want the paint to be not transparent. I really want this to show. I've had students ask me that before, like, how do you know when you should use the airbrush medium? And the best thing to think about, one is, do you need it to flow better? So the airbrush medium helps with that. But number two, do you want to affect the opacity of the paint? And by affecting the opacity, we can sneak up on it a little, make little adjustments without having to um, commit to big changes. I'm trying to get just a little bit of pink in my titanium white. And that's one of the things that I've noticed about painting this poinsettia is there's just such small incremental changes, such little value change makes a big difference. So if you think, I want this to be a little bit lighter, make it just a little bit lighter. Don't make your adjustments too dramatic all at once. Mostly clean brush. I'm just going to tap into some of the edges. I can look up and see this on my screen here, so I can see some of the areas that I might want to change. For you, take pictures often. Look at the painting that you're doing on your phone. It will really help. I was sharing a picture of this piece with a friend last night, and it was really in the pictures that I took to share with her that I could really see some of those things that really stuck out that I didn't notice necessarily while I was in the studio. So I'm just trying to look to see if there's any other place that I feel like I need to adjust that shadow. I think we're gonna have to do something with the humidifier or something in our house because man, everything is just drying so quickly. I just added a little bit more of the quinacridone magenta there, um, just to soften that sort of purple highlight I'm sorry, purple shadow that was showing there. I think I'm going to come back in with just some pure white in just a couple of places. This little tip of this bract down here. Wipe out most of the paint. Dip into the airbrush medium if you feel like it's still going too far. And then tap that in. So you can spend as much time as you want to on this. Don't get Have fun with it. Don't get frustrated with it. If you don't like it yet, keep going back and forth with the different values. But I really think that those improvements that we made really made this piece everything that I hoped it was going to be. I hope that you have a lot of fun painting this piece. It's not easy. Um, and that's not the point of the everyday art classes. I hope that you um, grow in your art and try hard things. The hardest part about this poinsettia is just going back and forth, letting some of those different values come in, adding some that are a little bit darker, some brush strokes that are a little bit darker, coming in with brush strokes that are a little bit lighter, and just continuing to go back and forth between those values until you have it the way that you like it. I think if you start out with this pink, the naphthol red, sorry, the pyrrole red, the quinacridone magenta, and the burnt sienna, and you build your pinks off of that, every now and then you can add in a little bit of the phthalo blue like we did in some of the previous videos, um, to darken some areas. But I think if you stay with this pink that I showed you today and then adjust the values lighter with some titanium white, you'll have um, you'll have a pretty flower that you really enjoy. Yeah, it's very pretty. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I've really had so much fun painting this poinsettia. This is the first poinsettia that I've painted, so I hope that you enjoyed some of my thought process as I went through this, even some of the changes with the background that we made. Art is an experiment, and we can't know all of the things that we're going to have to know when we first start. We have to try some things, and if we don't like it, we can always adjust it a little bit and get a really beautiful painting in the end. So be watching for the next everyday art class. We will be having lots more of them coming. I'm having so much fun painting these. I did want to just tilt this so that you could see a little bit some of the detail that the engraved lines from the laser still leave on this piece. And when you view it from the sides, those little fine engraved marks really add some character to the pieces. And I'm really enjoying seeing some of those details. So with some of the veining, even where I didn't necessarily go in and paint a vein, you can still pick it out because of that detail that the laser left. So be watching for these. Be sure that you grab the poinsettia engraved panel at Shelly Parker Art. Those links will be in each one of these videos too. So have a lot of fun with this one. And of course, share it with me if you paint one.